Hi guys, this is our second video about types of sentences. In our previous video, we talked about simple sentences and compound sentences, and today we are going to finish with complex sentences. So let's get right into it. A complex sentence is a sentence that is made up of one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. It contains a subordinating conjunction, and it might contain a comma. So that sounds like a lot of big words. I get it. So let's take each part and break it up and talk about it individually, and then we'll kind of put it all back together. All right, so a complex sentence has an independent clause and a dependent clause. Well, what are those things? We talked about independent clauses in the last video, because to be a simple sentence, right, you had to have one independent clause. And a compound sentence had two or more. So an independent clause, to review, has a subject and a verb, and it expresses a complete thought. So this example, the ball rolled down the driveway, that is an independent clause. It has a subject and a verb. The subject is ball, the verb is rolled, and it expresses a complete thought, right? The ball rolled down the driveway. That is a complete thought. That is a simple sentence, and it is an independent clause. A dependent clause is different. It still has a subject and a verb, but it does not express a complete thought. This is the difference right here. It does not express a complete thought. So my example here, as the ball rolled down the driveway, that's not a complete thought, because you are left asking, well, what? As the ball rolled down the driveway, what? What happened? What's going on? What's next? So even though it does have a subject and verb, right? Ball rolled, it's not a complete thought. And the reason that it becomes a dependent clause is because it has this word as, right? As the ball rolled down the driveway. As is what tells us, or it's what makes it not a complete thought. So that's a dependent clause. So this word as is a subordinating conjunction. Subordinating conjunctions are linking words or phrases. They link, right? They link the dependent clause to the independent clause, and they signal the relationship that those two clauses have. So let's look at an example to really understand what this means. Cal chased after the ball as it rolled down the driveway. This is a complex sentence. Let's see why. To be a complex sentence, you need one independent clause. So what part of this is an independent clause? Meaning it has a subject and a verb, and it could be a sentence all by itself. It's a complete thought. Cal chased after the ball. Cal chased after the ball is an independent clause. If I rewrote this, Cal chased after the ball, and put a period at the end, that would be a simple sentence. Cal is my subject, chased after the ball is my predicate, and it is a complete thought. So that's my independent clause. To be a complex sentence, you need at least one dependent clause. And so we just said in our one of the previous screens that the dependent clause is not a complete thought. It has a subject and a verb, but it's not a complete thought. So what part of this is left? As it rolled down the driveway. This is the dependent clause, because as it rolled down the driveway is not a complete thought. We still have the subject. It is the subject referring to the ball. And what did it do? It rolled, right? So subject and verb, but it's not a complete thought because of this subordinating conjunction, as. As is our subordinating conjunction. And I had said that the subordinating conjunction is a signal word to the relationship between the clauses. So in this case, as tells us, it's like a time relationship, right? As the ball rolled, Cal chased after it. The two things are happening at the same time. So that's the subordinating conjunction is showing how the two sentences are linked together or how they make sense together. The other thing that I had put up here about complex sentences is that it could contain a comma. And as you can see in this example, there are no commas, right? So when do you need a comma? How do you know if you need a comma or not? So if I flip and put the dependent clause first, then that's when I need the comma. So all I've done here is switched and put the dependent clause first and put the independent clause second. And now I need a comma. So it's as the ball rolled down the driveway, comma, Cal chased after it. Same idea is expressed, but because my sentence starts with the dependent clause, I have to have a comma. So that's how you know when you need a comma. Let's look at another example. Nolan laughed hysterically because the ball disappeared down the sewer drain. So my independent clause, or my part of this complex sentence that could stand on its own and be a sentence all by itself, is Nolan laughed hysterically. Nolan is the subject, laughed hysterically would be that complete predicate, and that could be a sentence all by itself. The dependent clause, the part that is not a complete thought, is the rest of it, because the ball disappeared down the sewer drain. That's not a complete sentence. If I tried to write that by itself, because the ball disappeared down the sewer drain, well, okay, what? What happened because the ball disappeared down the sewer drain, right? It leaves you asking more. That's not a complete thought. That is a dependent clause. Putting them all together, though, it makes sense. All right, and this word because is our subordinating conjunction. And how are these two related? How is the independent clause related to the dependent clause? It's cause and effect, right? The ball goes down the sewer drain, and that makes Nolan laugh. So because is a cause and effect signal word. That's our subordinating conjunction. To flip it, and where we need a comma, we just need to put the dependent clause first. Because the ball disappeared down the sewer drain, comma, Nolan laughed hysterically. Okay? All right. There are a ton of subordinating conjunctions, a ton. This is not all of them. This is just a few that I have listed here. There's a lot more. So these are some that these are probably the most common, I guess I should say. You should be familiar with these. You need to know some subordinating conjunctions. I'm not going to say you have to memorize all these, but you need to be familiar with these. I would like you to practice writing some complex sentences. You're going to pause the video and write at least 2 complex sentences inspired by this picture of dolphins. Remember that your complex sentence needs to have an independent clause, at least one dependent clause. So one part that could be a sentence by itself, one part that couldn't, and then these two need to be linked with a subordinating conjunction. And depending on how you write it, you might need a comma. So go ahead and pause and practice. So these are my 2 examples of complex sentences that relate to this picture. You obviously are going to have totally different sentences, but these are my 2 examples. I steadily held my camera while I snapped a picture of the dolphins. So my independent clause is, I steadily held my camera. That could be a sentence all by itself. I steadily held my camera, period. That is an independent clause. While I snapped a picture of the dolphins. Well, that by itself is not a complete thought. That is a dependent clause. While I snapped a picture of the dolphins. That's the dependent clause. putting them all together. And then this is my subordinating conjunction while. And again, this is a signal word of time, right? It tells us that these two, while this was going on, this was going on. While my independent clause is going on, my dependent clause is going on. So I steadily held my camera while I snapped a picture of the dolphins. My second example, as soon as they saw bubbles, the dolphins jumped out of the water. So in this situation, I put my dependent clause first. As soon as they saw bubbles, could that be a sentence by itself? No, because you're like, well, what happened as soon as they saw bubbles? If you just hear that and that's all you hear, you're left wondering or asking, well, what? As soon as who saw bubbles and what did they do? What's going on? It's not a complete thought. So as soon as they saw bubbles is my dependent clause. And then because my dependent clause is first, I've got my comma. The dolphins jumped out of the water is an independent clause. The dolphins jumped out of the water could be a sentence by itself, right? The dolphins jumped out of the water. I've got a subject, dolphins, jumped out of the water is a predicate. That could be by itself. So that's an independent clause. In this case, my subordinating conjunction is as soon as. And again, this one's kind of signaling a time relationship, right? As soon as this happened, this happened. Okay? All right, so as soon as they saw bubbles, the comma, the dolphins jumped out of the water. All right, so you guys are going to have some more practice with complex sentences that I have sent, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.